Welcome to the Civil War Wanderer. Today we are following in the steps of the 3rd Corps and the 124th New York during their time in the Chancellorsville campaign. They were not part of the fighting on May 1st, as they were still part of the illusion that the Union Army had not moved, that Hooker wanted to ensure that Lee wouldn't react to his movements of his 3 corps going crossing the Rappahannock and the Rapidan further north at Ely's Ford. But once the 11th Corps under Howard, the 12th Corps under Slocum, and the 5th Corps under Meade crossed, they opened up a few other fords, that one of them being the United States Ford, which the 3rd Corps will then use to cross. Unfortunately, today, the U.S. Ford, I've not been able to find a trail to it that doesn't cut through so much property, and I haven't gotten permissions to go down there. I'd like to one day, but I figured today the best that I can do is come to one of the other fords on the Rappahannock, so you kind of get an idea of what that looks like. I'm about 2.5 miles north of Fredericksburg on the Rappahannock, and so this is what they would have... similar to what they would have crossed back in 1863. The water comes about knee-high at the deepest point that I can see, but that's what made it a crossing point, is that the infantry could cross easily, and it's kind of where the two closest shorelines, the closest that they can get, that's kind of what they're looking for these crossings. So, all right, let's get to the next spot. I'm at the intersection of the United States Ford Road and the Spotswood Furnace Road. Right to my left, about less than a mile down, is the actual crossing point of the 3rd Corps. They would cross over and they would get onto the United States Ford Road to head towards Chancellorsville. So I just wanted to show you guys the actual spot that they would have came through. Still can't get to the ford, but we're at the intersection where they got onto the actual road.
I've been known from time to time to get in my own head, and I will walk the path of indecision for a while. Well, there's a battle in my mind, the lines are drawn.
After marching from U.S. Ford through the U.S. Ford Road, the next stop for the 124th New York would be here at the Chancellor House site. This is from reading from Chuck LaRocca's book on the regiment. And if you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. Read it in conjunction with Wygant's account. Really paints a full picture of what's going on here. But he says, Colonel Ellis, in his after-action report to his brigade commander, stated that upon crossing the pontoons, his regiment proceeded about 3 miles westerly and formed columns of division in an open space with a large building to the left. So for you guys, the viewer, to my right is the ruins of the Chancellor House. So if we're going off of this report, the 124th would have been posted up somewhere in this opening, maybe a little bit past those woods, but he says left of the house, which is right there. Here was collected a large body of troops, and an engagement took place in front of us with some severe cannonading, in which the enemy appeared to have the worst. The engagement Ellis mentioned was brought on by Hooker's men pushing out of the wilderness onto clear ground in the direction of Fredericksburg and Lee's rear. So the action that he's talking about there is the moment. So for context, we have Wilderness Tavern down that way, westerly. We have Fredericksburg down there towards the east. So when Hooker sends troops to kind of go check Lee's forces down there, he runs into Lee, and there is an engagement that takes place that the 124th is not a part of. But it's at this moment where I believe Hooker himself says this is where Hooker lost confidence in Hooker. He begins to doubt kind of his position and his strategy. So he actually pulls those troops back to fall in back here at the Chancellor House. Soon after, the 124th will receive orders to support a battery that is about a mile down westerly down this road. So they will actually hop on to the road that you see today. From my understanding, this road was actually a little bit closer to my left, not where its current position is, and they would march down in support of that battery. So yeah, this is the Chancellor House. Our next stop is going to be Hazel Grove, and from there, Catherine Furnace. The 124th New York will march to their position as ordered to support that battery in the afternoon of May 1st. They won't really see any action. Before that, they were ordered and instructed to drop knapsacks at their position left of the Chancellor House, and it was under guard, but they kind of regret that because the position that they take is kind of in a muddy area, so they have no gum blankets to kind of let them rest on something dry. They will stay into that position until around 9 o'clock. I think 10 is when they get the order to fall back to their position from earlier that morning at the Chancellor House, where they will get some rest. Wygant writes about a engagement that he sees to his front, and then an artilleryman that he intercepts, and he asks, hey, what was going on? And the artilleryman will go on to describe an action that took place that night earlier where Confederates tried to overrun a artillery position, and they were repulsed by canister shot and volleys from the supporting infantry in that position. I do believe that position is here in this Hazel Grove area, but that kind of wraps up the actions for the 124th on May 1st. May 2nd, Sickles will actually receive orders that there are enemy combatants to his front of his pickets. Sickles very instantly asks Hooker for permission to attack that column. Hooker, knowing that Sickles is a bit of an aggressive commander, gives him the go-ahead with the stipulation that he needs to leave one of his divisions at the Chancellor House with the rest of the Union line in reserve. So he will send out Birney's division, he will send out Whipple's division as support, and Barry's division will remain at the Chancellor House. The rank and file described that movement as a two-part movement, so around 6 a.m., the 124th gets orders to move back down the Plank Road where they had done the previous day. And they were there for a little bit, pushed into the wood line. And then Ellis says that they were pulled back out to the road and sent down further down about another mile to replace the pickets of Birney's division down there. And so it does say they passed Hazel Grove, which is this area that I am now. As you can see, the cannons are facing towards the Chancellor House. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but what happens is when the 11th Corps collapses, Hooker tries to consolidate his line, so he actually pulls his artillery back from Hazel Grove to another position. And the Confederates very quickly, I believe it's under Alexander Porter, very quickly take up this position and begin lobbing shells to their line. But like I said, we'll talk about that a little bit further down. So our next stop is going to be Catherine's Furnace. after being relieved from their position further up Furnace Road, the 84th Pennsylvania, along with the 124th, excuse me, would be called up to support the 1st and 2nd U.S. sharpshooters under Hiram Berdan's command. So they would come down here and around this area, and further down, they would engage some Confederates. The 124th didn't really engage too much, but they were witness to seeing the sharpshooters capture about 300 Confederates here at the fighting at Catherine Furnace. From here, the 124th would get word that Birney's division was driving the enemy, and now Whipple moved forward in support. Third Corps staff officer wrote, leaving the batteries at the farm about midway between the Plank Road and our line of battle. When it formed in line, the 2nd Brigade and the 124th New York on the right, connecting with General Ward's brigade, and the 2 remaining regiments of the 1st Brigade on the left, connecting with General Williams' command of the 12th Corps. We advanced in fine style, the 1st Brigade firing a few volleys and feeling almost sure of success. The 124th reached its designated position and went into line of battle behind Scott's Run, about a quarter mile from the old iron furnace. So this will be the old iron furnace that they're talking about. So the regiment actually formed the right of Franklin's brigade, which is still further up, about halfway between Hazel Grove and this position. The left of Franklin's brigade would connect with Alpheus Williams' division of Slocum's 12th Corps, excuse me, and General Sickles placed Whipple's men there to close the considerable interval between Birney and Williams. Colonel Ellis wrote that they formed line of battle under the directions of Major Sickles in company with our whole division and many other troops. So we will be going back to that position to take a look at that. So the 124th, after supporting the Berdan sharpshooters, get called back to Franklin's position. So what ends up happening is they are moving towards an area that I am currently walking towards. It's about a 5-minute walk down that way. It says that bullets started rushing overhead. So who they are being engaged by are Georgians under, I believe it was Wright from Anderson's, right under Anderson. And so they will go and engage those Confederates. So we're just going to kind of walk there. There's not a trail that leads down there, but we are going to see how far we can get. They talk about just kind of a ravine between them and the enemy pickets. And just for context, Catherine's Furnace is down this road. Hazel Grove is down that road. And so we are going to cut across here and head towards that position where the 124th would be engaging those Georgians. So, unfortunately, or fortunately, I think I have found the ravine. So, from where I plotted on my map, we're about maybe a 4-minute walk in that direction, which is where I calculate the 124th should have been engaging. An interesting note, so these Georgians, these pickets, are actually supposed to be distracting Joe Hooker and the rest of the army from Jackson's flank attack, and they do a pretty good job of it. They now have 2, Yankee divisions engaging them. So Franklin's main setup would be right about over there. It says that the 124th came up to the left of I believe it's the 122nd Pennsylvania, which on the maps hold a position a little bit further back that way. So we came up to the left over here and began to engage those picket lines. So yeah, see the terrain, check it out. So actually, this is Lewis Run or Lewis Creek, which is where Sickles's advance guard and pickets had actually first seen movement. So this is the area where that all kind of kicks off the actions for the Third Corps for May 2nd. So I'm going to get back on the trail because I don't know if I'm allowed to be back here, but yeah. After the 122nd Pennsylvania gets routed, which also want to expand on that a little bit. So they were fairly new recruits, and their enlistments were actually almost up. So when the Confederates attack, and they have that skirmish in the woods where the 122nd and the 124th are fighting against them, they do rout. And so there is some confusion. One of the soldiers writes home that, we were all confused. And then another member writes home and he's like, we weren't necessarily confused. The 122nd was routed, but the 124th, once they got back into the clearing from the woods, they were reformed, and every man was right where he was supposed to be. Regardless, once that skirmish ends, General Whipple will actually detach them again from Franklin and sends them towards a wooded hill on their right front to support Colonel Bowman's brigade. But upon arriving at this designated hill, neither Bowman nor his men were anywhere to be found. On the maps, it doesn't necessarily say where Bowman's men were not. But knowing that Franklin's posted up towards my left and further back on some high ground, and there's a bit of a flat bit, and then this would form this hill to the right front, how it's described in this account. Colonel Ellis will actually post himself. It says here, Ellis ordered his men into a line of battle and placing himself at the head of the color guard, ordered the charge. A mighty hoorah that made the woods ring announced the presence of the 124th New York. The men, cheering lustily, charged into the woods, and a soldier in the ranks noted it was around 5 p.m. when we formed a battle line, unslung our knapsacks, ready for a charge down a steep hill through brush and briars. But when we got down in the hollow, the enemy was not to be found. They had fled into the woods. So this, I believe we are within the area of that charge. But later, General Whipple rode up personally, ordered the halt, and directed Ellis to fall back towards Hooker's main line. But here's, I think, if this isn't it, I do believe we are close to that hill that the 124th did their charge into nothing. But just kind of goes to show that these were fighting men, that they, going from the action down at Catherine's Furnace with the Berdan sharpshooters, they were ready and willing to fight with them, and then they moved up a little bit down, back up the line and fought with the 122nd PA against those Georgians over there. And then almost immediately after, you have them being detached again, tasked out to support Bowman in a repulse attack that ultimately didn't need to be done. But nonetheless, the men of the 124th kept living up to their name of the fighting men that Colonel Ellis wanted. So kind of reminiscent of the charge too far that they would do a couple of weeks down the line at Gettysburg in the Triangular Field. So something that would not be new to them. But if this area looks familiar to you, you'd be right. We are back at Hazel Grove. So after the 124th's charge not so far, Sickles starts to hear rumors that the 11th Corps has been routed. At first, he doesn't believe the claims, But as couriers come to confirm it, he immediately takes action. He will actually send his cavalry to check the rebel advance, which will be coming from that direction. So for context, down here, Catherine Furnace, all the fighting that the 124th did down there. We have Fairview right here. We're over there in that opening. And then past that is the Chancellor House. That way is the Plank Road. So immediately sends his cavalry out to check the advance, and he will actually consolidate his third corps. He sends runners down to get Bernie back up and Whipple, and they will consolidate back here at Hazel Grove, and I'm going to walk to where the 124th would be posted, which I don't think I'll get too far because I see no trespassing signs. So we're gonna get as close as we can. Yeah, okay, so there is a barrier, which is okay. We don't want to break any rules out here, but we do like to explore. So I'm gonna go ahead and, all right, Hazel Grove right there. And so the third corps would take a defensive position in front and to the left and to the right of Hazel Grove down towards this direction. And they will stay into this position into the night of the 2nd. So, like I said, can't get too much further because there's signs and a barrier. So not gonna break any rules today, guys. Sorry. And as I'm walking back through Hazel Grove and back to my car to hit the next spot, I do want to talk about Sickles. Dan Sickles up to this point. Oh, we are going sideways. Let me fix that. There we go. Dan Sickles, at this point in the war, hasn't really done anything overtly good or bad, per se. I'm sure he still has the reputation as the congressman who killed his wife's lover and got away with it. But it really is in this moment on May 2nd that he kind of steps into the role that he envisioned for himself as far as commanding soldiers out in the field. He does rally his men, these soldiers that were kind of running around and all the confusion. He really does consolidate them, and he sets up a defense, and really kind of saves the day for Hooker in a sense, because they hold this line into the night. They lot of fighting back and forth, but ultimately Sickles holds Hazel Grove, and thus impeding the Confederates from marching through Hazel Grove, through Fairview, and to the Chancellor House. So gotta give Dan Sickles credit where it's due, and I think this is one of those moments that I think it's merited. I do think it's merited. Now, we will soon see a decision that's made at a higher level than he by Hooker to abandon Hazel Grove and fall back, and we'll see the consequence of that and how that plays almost directly into Sickles' decisions at the Peach Orchard in Gettysburg a couple of weeks later. So before we leave this area of Hazel Grove, I do want to note another action that the 124th took place, and it was a reconnaissance mission. Ellis gets orders to send out a reconnaissance element to see and ascertain where the enemy would be. So to my right is where we were just at with Hazel Grove. I'm about maybe 40 yards to the left or to the right of that. So the two officers in charge of this reconnoitering party are Captain Murray from Company B and then Captain Wygant. Murray will actually go down to the left, and he will run into an enemy column, and he will retrace his steps back, and he will inform Ellis of what he saw. Captain Wygant will take 10 men down and to the right towards where the 11th Corps was routed. They will stumble across 2 caissons and 2 rifle guns. And just the way Wygant describes it is that there's just bodies and wounded all across the way from the 11th Corps being routed. So they eventually come back, and as he's about to report to Ellis what he saw, the 124th actually starts firing in their defensive front. Confederates throughout this time, the whole night, had been kept trying to attack the position, and kept getting repulsed by 3rd Corps and the 124th up there. And that fighting ultimately quiets down at around midnight. Now, there's a story that Wygant writes about that at around 10 o'clock, a rider with a authoritative voice comes up and he asks, who is there? And the 124th responds, we're the 124th. And at this response, this unknown rider, apparently turns his horse around and just gets the hell out of there. We all know that Jackson was reconning the enemy position the night of the 2nd, but there's a couple of issues with the 124th story, or their account of it, because they say that after that, Ellis was like, well, that's a rebel rider there, open fire. So the regiment will, shoot a volley, and said that Ellis also shoots his pistol at him. There's no reports of anyone getting wounded or anyone getting hit, but the issue, and so years later, people start to think, Wygant start saying that, there's little doubt that was actually Thomas Stonewall Jackson. The issue is we are on the south side of the Plank Road. Jackson was wounded on the north side, and he actually got wounded anywhere between an hour or 2 or 3 hours before this incident it happens that the 124th writes about. So speculation, could it have been Jackson reconnoitering the lines and this wasn't the volley that takes him out? Possible, but it's definitely not, we know now historically, not the wounding of Jackson that would happen hours beforehand. Sorry, I take back what I said. It couldn't have been Jackson at all, because Jackson had already been wounded. But just as Ellis had been ordered to send patrols out to reconnoiter, I'm sure the rebel infantry was tasked with doing the same. But just a neat little story of a what if, or a little myth with the 124th. But all right, from here, I think our next stop is going to be back at the Chancellor House. All right, so it's the morning of May 3rd, 1863. Sickles has successfully held the Confederate attacks at Hazel Grove. He has a very strong position, but Hooker decides to consolidate his troops closer to the Chancellor line. So Sickles, following orders, will immediately order his men to construct a road that will get them quickest to Fairview and then the Chancellor House. Because at this point, the Plank Road that 3rd Corps originally came down on is now occupied by elements of Lee's army. So that's now no longer a viable way for them to get back to where they started. So The 124th gets its marching orders. They're actually one of the last regiments to leave Hazel Grove. Actually, Wygant is in charged with companies A and F that are going to cover the retreat of the rest of the 124th. And so he sends out skirmishers, and he has half of one of the companies in reserve. And they start moving out. And General Whipple himself will actually go to Wygant and ask him his orders. And at Wygant's response of telling him what the orders are, he's like, no, you need to hold this position and just check the Confederates as much as you can. So now you have a couple of hundred guys under Wygant facing off against thousands of Confederates that are trying to get to this location of Fairview. So this over here is Fairview right here. So we will walk up. You can kind of see over the ridge the cannons peeking out, so we're gonna go walk that way. But that is the distance that they had to cover. And mind you, the moment that we start abandoning Hazel Grove, rebel artillery officers, I believe it's Porter, immediately sees the benefit of that position, and he just starts running artillery up there, and they very quickly start firing onto the retreating Union troops and artillery in the caissons, and they start shelling Fairview. So it's easy for us to, well, here's the Gettysburg connection with that. Dan Sickles, he follows orders, he falls back to Fairview, and ultimately down to the Hooker's last line over by the Bullock House, but we'll get there later. So a couple of weeks later, Dan Sickles is put again into a position where he is at the mercy of Confederate artillery. There's high ground that is faced against him. And I think it's very present still, this battle and this shelling of Fairview. I think that's very fresh in his mind. So if you want to give Sickles a little bit of grace and understanding, you can make the argument that the decision to extend his line and create that salient at the Peach Orchard was not out of command immaturity or not being a West Pointer. I think he very well wanted to avoid another situation like Fairview. The issue with Gettysburg is his line is it's too thin. He doesn't have the manpower to fill that line effectively like he did over at Hazel Grove. And so that's where, that it does work against him. But we are now at the cannons right here. So these lunettes right here, you can see them, were built kind of at a, I wouldn't say leisurely pace, but, not with too much pressure on May 1st and 2nd. Now, the other ones, those were built very hastily, and those guns are now directed towards where Jackson's flank attack was coming up from. So that's why you have two different sets of lunettes here in this area. So the 124th ultimately gets here. They will hook their right flank to the right of the Plank Road, south side, and we'll come here and about this area. It says they're in front of some batteries that are heavily engaging the Confederates. So somewhere in this area is probably where that line ended. But let's see what the next step is. So I do need to backtrack a little bit what I had said about the position of the 124th. I had originally understood that they were between that first ridge and this line of artillery, which at the time of the battle, it wasn't actually a line of artillery. There was artillery behind lunettes, breastworks, out in the open. It was kind of all over the place. But upon reading further the account from Chuck LaRocca, he says that the 124th was anchored on the right flank on the south of the Plank Road, which is over there. You can see the cars going by. And then came out behind the artillery. And there is an account of as the 124th is getting ready to move, a caisson of ammunition actually explodes and burning the gun crew, killing them, and then wounding others that are nearby. But so on the north side of the Plank Road, that Union right flank is getting pushed pretty hard, and they're actually about at the brink of collapsing. So Ellis gets orders to go support. Actually, Franklin gets orders to go support. And so he gets his men ready to go. And I am going to try to get as close as I can to where the 124th crossed over the Plank Road to support the right flank. So here we are at the Plank Road south side. We are in a rear position of the artillery up there. So Ellis his men are currently in a line of battle. He'll give the command to by the right, and they'll go into column or fours over the Plank Road. At this time, companies A and F, which were the rear guard, are still not in position, but Wygant rushes them up to catch up with the rest of the regiment, to which Ellis tells Wygant, basically told him, like, I thought you'd all died, but I'm glad you're here. And he tells Wygant, let's give the girls from Orange County a good report. So along with the 122nd Pennsylvania, they will cross over the Plank Road and support that failing right flank. They'll actually sweep over Lewis Creek and push out that way, along with some sharpshooters. They're facing off North Carolinians. I want to say Georgians again. I might be wrong about that. But, so yeah. This is where, between here and maybe like a little bit further down there, is where the 124th would have crossed over to support that right flank. What the goal for the Confederates was to sweep the right and then come through here, and then from the rear take out the Federal artillery at Fairview. But that was not successful because the 124th pushed them back. So I am still here on the south side of the Plank Road, but I wanted to read a few things that Chuck talks about in his book. So one of the funnier things to me is, so once they cross over, they're about there for about half an hour, and Colonel Ellis actually takes one of his men's muskets and is trying to see if he can pop off a Johnny himself. But while he's playing sharpshooter, the right wing of the 124th actually begins to take fire. And they're calling out to Ellis for orders, but he cannot hear them over the musket firing from the enemy. So they ultimately just start opening fire themselves without command. Ellis then gets his right wing to face the threat, which he says they did valiantly under fire. And so, yeah, I just thought it was funny that Ellis took a couple pop shots at the Rebs. But I also want to read this account of the fighting that does take place over there. This is from the Sergeant Charles Stewart, and he writes about the fighting over by Lewis Creek. The barrel of my gun was so hot I could scarcely touch it. I fired 22 rounds when a ball struck me on the head above the right eye. I felt the sting, but thought nothing of it till I saw the blood pouring. Then I made up my mind that the ball must have entered the skull and that the wound was mortal. I dropped my gun and B took me to the rear where I had my wound dressed. It was not so bad as I supposed. The skin was torn and the skull a wee bit cracked. I was and still am weak from loss of blood. That first volley that hits the 124th immediately starts dropping bodies. And other soldiers go on to write that they don't necessarily, once engaged, realize how dangerous the situation is until they start seeing, their comrades falling one after the other. So that is probably some of the heaviest fighting that the 124th has been engaged in directly up to this point in their time of service. So yeah. So for about an hour and a half, the 124 is fighting across the Plank Road. They have artillery support from Fairview, but ultimately Stewart's third line of attack begins to break the line here at Fairview. These guns will start to fall back along with any infantry that's here. Ellis gets the order to fall back as well, because to stay in his position would mean the capture or the death of his men. So they will retreat back across the road and begin to retreat towards right about down there. You see that line. Now the 124th, upon looking at this position, they will see a Confederate flag triumphantly moving forward into this area that they once held, and that doesn't sit too well with the 124th. So they will actually reform the line, and Cromwell will actually lead this charge. And it says they charged up from the open field as far up to the little house on the left. Now, the little house on the left that they're talking about is the Fairview house, which you can see the outline here, which was part of the Chancellor property at the time. So they charged up to this position from back there after have been fighting for about an hour and a half across on the right flank, and were actually able to take back a couple of artillery pieces that had been left behind. So there's the 124th again with another charge, and this one actually does a pretty good job of reclaiming a lot of lost ground. So the 124th will hold this position and will eventually start to fall back as the rest of these guns pieces get pulled off the ridge. And they are now holding a position a little closer to the crossroads down there. Ellis informs his men that they are probably about to get ready to help Mars Irish Brigade, who were about to do a charge with the bayonet. But it says that we lay down behind them in line of battle with a battery on our right, and were here shelled by the enemy in the liveliest manner. A caisson blown up in front of us filled the air with fragments, and the roar and the bursting of shells was one continuous thunder. So that is probably about, let me see if I can zoom in. Right about where you see that greenery change up on towards the crossroad intersection down there. So after they're charged back to Fairview and reclaiming that position and supporting units that were coming off of the ridge, they eventually, like I said, go down to their rifle pits towards the crossroads. At this point, they've not been resupplied at all, and they have been dwindling down their ammunition from all the fighting that throughout the day. So Ellis sees that there is a trail of pack mules down towards, a little past their position, and there are these boxes of ammunition strapped to them. So he's trying to figure out a plan of how to retrieve that ammunition before the Confederates do. And a young Sergeant Thomas Bradley will actually volunteer to go alone to retrieve these boxes of ammunition. So he hands off his rifle, drops his leathers, haversack, knapsack, he drops everything. And he goes and he grabs these boxes, these crates of ammunition, and then running backwards with his face towards the enemy, would drag these heavy crates of ammunition back to the 124th so that they could get refitted. Sickles apparently knew of this action very soon after, and years later, Sergeant Thomas Bradley would get the Medal of Honor for his actions here at Chancellorsville. The 124th eventually will be pulled to the rear to construct rifle pits. They come under small skirmish type of fire, a little bit of our scattered artillery on the 4th. And then on the 5th, they will ultimately get the order to pack up and start falling back through the fords and back to their old positions before the battle happened. So I hope you enjoyed this walking in the footsteps of the 124th. After, doing all this research and coming out here and actually walking the grounds, I can say that I understand a lot more what I read about, but I appreciate a lot more the actions of the 124th. They truly showed their worth at this battle, and just gives me more appreciation for the unit that I represent. You can see I got the hoodie on. So I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you at the next one. Oh, well, I guess I should mention after this, the armies will go back into their previous winter quarters. Hooker will eventually get replaced. Lee will take the offensive up to Pennsylvania, and Meade will take control of the Union Army 3 days before meeting Lee at a little town known as Gettysburg. And there we will see the 124th once again hold a position that is not the best, by a decision made by not the best circumstances, and they will conduct another charge gallantly. And we'll just leave it there for now. But hope you enjoyed, and till the next one, this is the Civil War Wanderer logging off.